Hi there. This is my commentary on Chapter 14 of Lila, An Inquiry into Morals by Robert M. Pirsig. Where was everybody? It was like the river coming down here. It was too quiet. What had happened this afternoon? She couldn't remember very well. She got frightened about something, the wind and the noise, and then she fell asleep. And now she was here. Why? So this is Lila's state of mind, as we are beginning to see, is so often like this, disoriented and kind of dissociated. She lives pretty much in the present moment and the emotions associated with immediate perceptions. This is a very long chapter whose primary purpose is to show, one, how incompatible Lila and the captain are socially, how they don't live at all in the same world. Two, how challenging it is to try to dig deep down into a person's psyche. And three, the details of Lila's sad life. So I think this chapter also helps demonstrate that Pirsig didn't want the metaphysics of quality to be some kind of theoretical entity to be carved up and spooned. I think he really wanted it to be used to understand reality and how we operate in the world. So that's why he's continually showing us examples of its implementation and how, for example, we can understand the ways two totally different people can come together in some ways, on some levels, and be completely in conflict on others. And in this chapter, they're mostly in conflict with small windows of not being in coming together. So I think this chapter also demonstrates that people often have a dominant level of the three levels that actually influence human behavior in any kind of concrete way. Phaedrus and Lila are both pretty socially inept, for example, but in entirely different ways. Phaedrus is intellect dominant, which puts him at one level of social understanding. He's over here on the spectrum of the social level. He's in between the social and intellectual. And it makes him socially awkward because he doesn't get what is fun for regular people. He's too cerebral. For him, for example, as a kid, the chemistry lab is fun. Chemistry is not bad if you're into it, he said. It gets kind of exciting. I and another kid got the key to the school building, and sometimes we'd come back at 10 or 11 at night and go up to the chemistry laboratory and work on chemistry experiments until dawn. And Lila thinks that is very weird. And Phaedrus reminds her of another nerd who she dated. He was smart, but at the same time he was dumb. He could never see how dumb he was because he thought he knew everything. Everyone used to call him Sad Sack, an overly intellectual nerd. And Phaedrus remembers a painful memory of the whole audience of a movie laughing at an awkward chemistry professor character, while he seethes and feels sad and ever more isolated in society, being a chemistry professor himself, or at least studying to be one. The iconic story he remembers is of Lila on the streetcar and her friend laughing at his awkward appearance. So the same way he's isolated on the intellectual end of the spectrum, Lila is isolated near the biological end. She's over here. She can't advance in society because she won't play by their rules because she's biologically dominant. On the social level, Lila's just a hair's breadth away from the biological. Like one of her animal predecessors, she's extremely reactive. She pretty much lives in the moment, her worldview changing with every glance of a stranger, for example. A mean look sends her into a tailspin of anger. A smile, and she's on top of the world, like this line. She let it out more slowly, and the captain held his hands out to guide the dinghy into the water. Then he turned and said, "That's good. At least she did one thing right." He even smiled a little. Maybe tonight wouldn't be so bad. So she's very much like a dog who loves you or fears you or is angry with you depending on what you're doing in the moment. Obviously, she has this whole anger thing going on. And according to Jaak Panksepp, the affective neurobiologist or neuroscientist, the most primitive emotions are rage, fear, lust, and seeking, which is obviously the emotional mechanism that connects the human brain and the animal brain to quality, good or bad, and is how the perception and the seeking of quality is manifested in living beings. But she's oddly careful in the way she works with her hands. She puts on her mascara, for example, and clothing very carefully. How it looks, that's a matter of opinion, but she's a careful dresser and carefully applies her makeup. She is judicious, for example, about selecting and cooking food, and oddly, for someone so close to the biological, she waits all day to eat, no snacks at all, even though she keeps thinking about how hungry she is. An odd discipline that doesn't really line up with her good time penchant for instant gratification. And this is something that the two have in common. They innately seem to know the high quality of being careful with hands-on processes. And these processes are a combination of biological interaction with the environment and intellectual desire for a good outcome, whether it's maneuvering the boat or making the perfect steak and French fries. Lila's close to the surface emotional state comes up again and again, and without warning, just like her reactivity. She made me mad. Everything makes you mad. I have to do that, Lila said. Now I'll feel fine all night. I would have thought you might have enough problems of your own, the captain said. She didn't say anything, but it felt good. It always felt better after she lost her temper like that. She didn't know why, but she always did. So that kind of energy, that biological anger, it gets that, is that energy. It's getting it out in a very primitive kind of way by exploding, is something that once it's over, she gets the rush of dopamine, I guess, and feels better. So that is how she deals with conflict, by exploding. People are so mean to kids, Lila said. Lila has a certain fierce desire to defend the downtrodden. She hates mean people more than anything. They oppose her social status stemming from her desire to be free to experience a life of pleasure, kind of like a child. And this is exactly what Rigel and his mother find completely reprehensible. Well, you know why. We know why Rigel's mother hates her. She is very rich, and I'm not in their social class. Also, women don't approve of people like me, especially mothers with little sons who are interested in me. Then the captain says this, which sort of reminds me of the way he opposes the top-down stylizing of low-quality technology in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. Like there's a sadness to reality that is more meaningful than the superficial, let's say, American cheerful persona. How are you? And the answer is always fine. It's a sort of acknowledgement of the inescapable tragedy of an existence and kind of an homage to its meaningfulness all the same. There's always that feeling of despair down there. I can feel it just now thinking about it. Triste tropique, the anthropologist Levi Strauss called it. It keeps pulling you back somehow. Mexicans know what I mean. There's always this feeling that this sadness is the real truth about things, and it's better to live with a sad truth than with all the happy progress talk you get up there in the north. It's also much more authentic. And in a way, higher quality because it's more tied to the reality of existence, which is high and low quality all the time, forever. The captain wants to use Lila to help him understand his own emerging theory, and he wants to do something like an archaeological dig to see how Lila's attitudes and values have made her a culture of one that she is. You're sort of a culture, he said, a culture of one. A culture is an evolved static pattern of quality capable of dynamic change. That's what you are. That's the best definition of you that's ever been invented. She didn't know what he was talking about. All she could think of was Florida. And then he says, what holds a person together is a pattern of likes and dislikes, he said. And what holds a society together is a pattern of likes and dislikes. And what holds the whole world together is patterns of likes and dislikes. History is just abstracted from biography, and so are all the social sciences. In the past, anthropology has been centered around collective objects, and I'm interested in probing around to see if it can be better said in terms of individual values. I've just had feelings that maybe the ultimate truth about the world isn't history or sociology, but biography, he said. So let's look at this statement knowing what we know already about the metaphysics of quality. As a theory of evolution, it makes complete sense that the world is made up of likes and dislikes. Each action that any entity takes is based on a perception of good or bad quality. And the general rule is that the perception of quality is also the perception of freedom, and we can talk about this some other time because we're trying to just keep this brief. So an element, for example, will find freedom in writing the complexity of a carbon molecule, and a bird evolves to transcend the law of gravity because there's more freedom, obviously, in flying, and so on and on. And in terms of humans, our brains evolved with the environment to further be able to squash the biological threats and create freedom implementing structures. So once intellect was developed, a great transcendence was able to be implemented. Our social patterns further our strength in numbers, for example, and that sort of naturally is a way to get more freedom for the individual, is by having this protective layer, this protective wall of tribes, of cities, 4 to 5 cities, for example. Each move creates a pattern, and each pattern layers upon another. Analogs upon analogs, he said in Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And now he's trying to unpack those analogs and find their origins in Lila. Have you ever heard of Heinrich Schliemann, he asked. Heinrich who? So Friedrich comes across as fairly clueless in this whole section. How can he not by now know that the chances of Lila knowing some obscure anthropologist is next to zero? And to even more demonstrate his cluelessness about the human psyche, which is odd, or at least it seems that way, which is odd considering his experience, he has an idea of doing an anthropological dig into Lila. Before Schliemann used what he called the stratigraphic technique, archaeologists were just educated grave robbers. He showed how you could dig down carefully through one stratum after another, finding the ruins of earlier cities under later ones. That's what I think can be done with a single person. I can take parts of your language and your values and trace them to old patterns that were laid down centuries ago and are what make you what you are. Since he's so excited about this intellectual activity, he forgets they're just having a nice meal together. It's more interesting to him to do this project than just enjoy the food and the booze and each other, which is Lila's favorite thing. Let's just relax and be friends, says Lila. He frowned a little, then shrugged his shoulders, got up again, and put the pad of slips away, much to his chagrin, I'm sure. So the whole questioning thing that he does with Lila doesn't really go well. Lila reports on her life in a kind of matter-of-fact way, and we do learn a few things, which will help us know her so we can make sense of the progression of her story in the book. But it's really difficult to determine whether any of this makes sense for what he's doing. His questions fortify what we already know about her. She's socially very close to the biological end of the spectrum, and reflection and insight in any kind of intellectual way is just not part of who she is. All her memories are in terms of basic biological quality. Did this make her feel good or did that make her feel bad? The social level is something she has great difficulty navigating, except in terms of biological fulfillment. Like she knows she can use this relationship to get that, which is generally comfort, which is generally a place to stay, someone paying for her. So it's always a the next strategy is very short-sighted. It's usually finding another guy. But the problem is the architectural dig of the psyche has already been going on for a century by this time, and it's called psychoanalysis. And he doesn't realize just how difficult and time-consuming it is to do this. All he sees is a bunch of junk, a bunch of very superficial reporting and a sad life. And really, there's probably a lot more behind that, and we'll get to that in a minute. And he should know this from his past experience. Although he kind of faked his way out of the hospital, probably didn't engage in the therapy at all, is what it sounds like. But he's reinventing his own method of mining likes and dislikes in a human being. And if he was paying attention to that mode of understanding, in a more psychological mode of understanding, he would realize something Lila says points to a real problem. It isn't any special thing that makes me feel bad. I don't know what it's going to be until it happens. She looked at him. Sometimes there's something that just comes over me and I get scared. That happened this afternoon. So speaking of psychoanalysis, let's stop here and look at the biographical information she tells us about herself as if it's a case study for a patient. Lila has a troubled relationship with her mother, who does not accept her true nature as a free spirit and probably assumes that the only way she's going to get by in life is to marry for money, and she encourages her to do this. Lila's father was a strict religious fundamentalist disciplinarian who tried to put the fear of God in her. And Lila was a teen bride and teen mother whose husband died, and she inadvertently smothered her own baby. Now you have the setup for a traumatized, troubled person. And this may very well give us some insight into the last part of the chapter. The final section turns a little strange when Lila, increasingly intoxicated, becomes irritated that Phaedrus is probing away at these questions with some kind of specific goal in mind to find out who she is. She then reveals herself, in my opinion, along the mythical lines we saw in the first chapter, something like the anima, a projection of whatever the man projects onto her. You think you're going to learn something. I don't know what, but you're not going to learn anything. You'll never find out who I am because I'm not anything. I'm not anybody. All these questions you're asking are just a waste of time. I know you're trying to find out what kind of person I am, but you're never going to find out anything because there's nothing to know. And then she describes a man's relationship with his anima, the perception of a woman that men carry around with them, influenced, of course, by the mother and other early perceptions of female. The man projects onto the woman these basic female archetypes. In this case, first the ideal woman who completely understands him and nurtures them like a mother, and then reality sets in. In Lila's case, usually after the understanding that they will get easy sex, which is not like a mother at all. So the second horror projection destroys that ideal and causes them to not have a high opinion of her. It causes them to be disdainful of her. But they all get fooled because there's nothing to destroy but what's in their own mind. And so they destroy that, and then they hate what's left, and they call what's left Lila. And they hate Lila, but Lila isn't anybody. That's true. You don't believe it, and it's true. And women are very deep, Lila said, but men never see it. They're too selfish. They always want women to understand them, and that's all they ever care about. That's why they always have to try to destroy them. Sure, because the woman doesn't measure up to the nurturance they expect from a mother. And on a very primal level, they are no longer useful once the sex act is over. And then she says, fuck your questions. I'm whatever your questions turn me into. You don't see that. It's your questions that make me who I am. If you think I'm an angel, then that's what I am. If you think I'm a whore, then that's what I am. I'm whatever you think. And if you change your mind about me, then I change too. So whatever Richard tells you is true. There's no way he can lie about me. The captain doesn't see that Lila is really on the ball on this one. She has tapped into a very primal dynamic between male and female, something he can't see from his ivory chemistry professor tower. The captain insists he's trying to elevate her, to understand her as a culture of one. But Lila is right. He has a terrible impression of her, and she knows it. No matter how no matter how nice he's being to her, he really is like all the others, and his ego and his intellect are telling him that that's not the case, that he's not like the others. But she can see through this. She can see through this, very, let's just say, basic projection. But it's also another revelation of just how troubled Lila is, how her desire just to be and experience quality is always being impeded by some manifest social pattern in which the mean man reminds her of her social status. She remarks that she's spent time fulfilling these projections and that they've gotten her nowhere. They've only gotten her the realization that she lacks an essential sense of self. I mean, I used to play I was this kind of person and that kind of person, but I got so tired of playing all those games. It's such work and it doesn't do any good. There are just all these pictures of who I am and they don't hold together. They're all different people I'm supposed to be, but none of them are me. I'm not anybody. I'm not here. The lack of sense of self makes total sense. Not her parents, nor her husband, nor society have ever validated her. She's bereft. She is emotionally still a child since no adult was there to help her navigate her emotional landscape. The meanness of the cold world is oppressive to her. In between pleasurable moments, she struggles in her survivalist life against bad luck and social disdain. So much negativity, so much low quality. She just wants to escape. So Lila makes her essential declaration. I just want to be free, she said. That's what America's all about, isn't it? We all want to be free. And what we can't really see with Lila, because we're so prejudiced against her, is her visceral reactivity is closer to understanding this reality than most of us will ever have. So I hope that made sense, and I'll see you next time.